The world of Westeros didn't just start with the execution of Ned Stark or the birth of Daenerys Targaryen. Oh no, there are over 12,000 years of histories packed into this world. So, today we are going to go through those thousands of years of story and history in chronological order and show you exactly how George R.R. Martin perfectly connected everything together. We will break down ancient prophecies and massive political plots that seamlessly tie into the shows you know and love. So, here is the complete timeline of the Game of Thrones' entire universe. The world before dragons. Long before the Iron Throne was ever forged, and thousands of years before the first Targaryen ever flew over Westeros, the Game of Thrones world was a very different place. There were no kings, no massive castles, and no great houses fighting for power. Instead, the continent belonged to magic. 12,000 years before Daenerys Targaryen, during an era known as the Dawn Age, Westeros was home to two main groups. First, there were the Children of the Forest. These were small and beautiful creatures who could use and control magic. They worshipped the gods of nature, which are now called the Old Gods.
According to legend, it was they who carved faces in the great white trunks of the majestic weirwoods. Their deep-cut eyes were red with sap and ever watchful.
Alongside them were the Giants, who were massive beings that rode mammoths and mostly kept to themselves. For countless centuries, these non-human races lived in peace, but everything changed when the first humans arrived. Around 12,000 years ago, a group of humans called the First Men crossed a land bridge from the eastern continent of Essos called the Arm of Dawn. They brought bronze weapons and started cutting down the sacred weirwood trees to make room for their farms and villages. This completely outraged the Children of the Forest, and it started a brutal, bloody war that lasted for generations. The children used their powerful magic to fight back, even shattering the land bridge so no more humans could cross, which created the broken islands we now know as the Stepstones. But it was too late, and the First Men on the continent were beginning to overpower them. In a last-ditch effort, the children used a piece of cursed dragon glass to turn one of the First Men into a monster that would help them fight the invaders. Their monster would later come to be known as the Night King.
It was you. You made the White Walkers.
We were at war.
However, the Children of the Forest didn't deploy the first White Walkers, as both sides realized that if they kept fighting, they would destroy each other. So their leaders met on an island called the Isle of Faces and signed a peace treaty known as the Pact. The First Men promised to stop cutting down the weirwood trees, and they even adopted the Old Gods as their own religion. They agreed to share the land, and for a long time, it actually worked.
The First Men would be granted dominion over the coastland, the mountains, the high plains and the bogs, but the deep forest would forever belong to the children, and no weirwood tree would ever again fall to man's axe.
This peace lasted for thousands of years, but then came one of the darkest periods in the history of Westeros. The White Walkers created by the Children of the Forest turned on their creators and brought a terrible, freezing winter that lasted for an entire generation. This era was known as the Long Night. The White Walkers invaded from the coldest parts of the north and brought an army of the dead. And that slaughtered everyone in its path, almost wiping out all life in Westeros.
Fear is for the winter, when the snows fall 100 feet deep. Fear is for the long night, when the sun hides for years.
The First Men and the Children of the Forest decided to team up once again in order to survive. Among the First Men was a hero who rose to fight against the darkness. While most details of this man are unknown, legends call him Azor Ahai. Azor Ahai needed to craft a sword to fight against the White Walkers, so he worked in a temple for 30 days to make it. However, when he went to temper the sword in water, it broke over and over again. Azor understood the sword demanded a sacrifice in order to be forged. So he drove his final untempered sword through his wife's heart and combined his wife's soul with it to create Lightbringer. Nissa, Nissa, bear your breast, and know that I love you best of all that is in this world. Azor Ahai led a troop of men to fight against the White Walkers in a massive conflict called the Battle for the Dawn. They finally managed to push the White Walkers back into the cold, and with the magic of the children, it was prophesied that Azor Ahai would be reborn again when the threat of the Long Night came back and lead humans to victory once more. While this prophecy was mostly a legend, it became a central part of the religion of the Red Priestess. When the red star bleeds and the darkness gathers, Azor Ahai shall be born again amidst smoke and salt, to wake dragons out of stone. After the Battle of the Long Night, the Children of the Forest and Brandon the Builder built the wall to keep the White Walkers away.
One hero of this fabled age was Bran the Builder. Bran raised the wall and built the stronghold of Winterfell, establishing House Stark and reigning as the first king in the north.
This massive barrier of solid ice and magic stretched all the way across the northern border of the continent. Brandon also created Night's Watch, a brotherhood of men sworn to guard the realm of the living, and peace was once again established in Westeros. But almost 6,000 years later, a new group of humans called the Andals crossed the Narrow Sea in massive ships. Unlike the first men, the Andals had advanced steel weapons and brought a completely new religion to Westeros called the Faith of the Seven. They were determined to conquer the land and spread their faith by force.
Slaughtering the children of the forest wherever they could find them, burning out their weirwood groves, hacking away at the faces of the old gods, and spreading their own religion through the land.
The Andals conquered almost the entire southern half of the continent, while killing the children of the forest that lived there. They completely took over the lands and replaced the old ways. The only place they couldn't conquer was the north. The first men who lived there used their deadly, toxic swamps of the neck as a choke point and successfully fought off the Andal armies. This is exactly why the Starks and the northern houses still worship the old gods today, while the rest of the south now prays to the Seven. While Westeros was busy dividing itself into different kingdoms and fighting constant wars, a completely different kind of power was rising over in Essos.
Thousands of years ago, while the rest of men prayed to gods, the Valyrians became them.
A group of shepherds stumbled upon dragons living inside a massive chain of volcanoes called the 14 Flames. They used magic to tame these massive beasts, and with the power of dragons, they built the Valyrian Freehold.
In time, the Valyrians were able to tame the beasts. Harnessing their immense power, they established a city of wonder, unlike any before or since.
For thousands of years, Valyria was the greatest empire the world had ever seen. They had massive cities filled with magic, and no one could stand against them because of their dragons.
It was a city and an empire built to last until the end of time.
But then, without any warning, it all came crashing down. An apocalyptic event known as the Doom of Valyria caused every single volcano in the empire to erupt simultaneously. The land shattered, the oceans boiled, and the greatest city in the world was burned completely to ashes in a single day. Almost all the dragons and their riders were wiped out in an instant, leaving behind an uninhabitable area called the Smoking Sea.
In hours, the greatest city in history became history.
But just before the doom happened, a minor family of dragon lords fled Valyria because Daenerys the Dreamer had a prophetic vision of the destruction. They fled and settled on a tiny rocky island off the coast of Westeros called Dragonstone. This family was the Targaryens.
Legends claim that his daughter foresaw the destruction of the city in a dream. More likely, Aenar met with some mishap at court and chose exile over execution.
And while the 7 kingdoms of Westeros spent centuries fighting each other with steel and shields, they were completely unprepared for the threat that was about to fly over the Narrow Sea. Aegon's Conquest. 100 years after the doom of Valyria wiped out their homeland, the Targaryens were living on the island of Dragonstone and preserving their Valyrian ancestry through dragon breeding and incestuous marriages. For generations they lived peacefully until Aegon Targaryen looked westward and saw a land ready to be conquered.
He and his sisters Rhaenys and Visenya flew over the great continent, a personal map of the 7 kingdoms, then ruled by 7 squabbling families.
However, some say this conquest was not born of ambition or madness, but rather a prophetic dream. In the dream, Aegon saw the return of the White Walkers and an endless night that would consume the entire world. This dream was the first prophecy in the history of Game of Thrones, which was later passed down from kings to their heirs, called A Song of Ice and Fire.
A king or queen, strong enough to unite the realm against the cold and the dark. Aegon called his dream the Song of Ice and Fire. This secret, it's been passed from king to heir since Aegon's time. Now you must promise to carry it.
At that time, Westeros was a complete mess, and the continent was divided into 7 kingdoms that spent their time fighting amongst each other. But Aegon was about to change that by uniting the kingdoms under one king.
Together, the 7 kingdoms made Westeros, a realm that wasn't yet a realm, ruled by great families who didn't know what greatness was. Aegon would teach them.
That time, he didn't have a massive army to pull this off. But what he did have were his 2 sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, and 3 fully grown dragons. Visenya rode Vhagar, Rhaenys rode Meraxes, and Aegon rode Balerion the Black Dread, the only surviving beast that had seen Valyria before its doom. They began their conquest after landing at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush with a small force, and sent out a simple and clear message to all the rulers of Westeros.
As his army prepared to sail, ravens flew to every great lord of the 7 kingdoms. All bore the same message. Those who bent the knee would keep their lands and titles. Those who took up arms against him would be thrown down, humbled, and destroyed.
When Aegon approached the Riverlands, the lords revolted against their lord paramount and joined his army. But the first real test came at the castle of Harrenhal. King Harren the Black had just finished building Harrenhal, and it was credited as the largest and strongest castle in the history of the known world. Its walls were so high that any attack from the land was impossible.
Harrenhal was built to withstand an attack from the land 300 years after his death.
But when Aegon arrived outside its gates, Harren refused to surrender, and instead locked himself inside his massive fortress, believing that the thick stone walls could protect him from anything.
Yield now, and you may remain as Lord of the Iron Islands. Yield now, and your sons will live to rule after you. You see my army outside your walls. You see my dragons. When the sun sets, your line shall end.
That was one hell of a speech. And when night fell, Aegon flew Balerion high up into the clouds, and dove straight down towards the castle, and unleashed black dragon fire so unimaginably hot that it actually melted the stone. Harren and his entire family were roasted alive inside their invincible fortress. In a single night, Aegon proved to the entire world that regular castles were completely useless against dragons and their dragon fire. While Aegon was conquering Harrenhal, Orys Baratheon, the bastard brother of Aegon, along with Rhaenys Targaryen and her dragon Meraxes, rode south to secure the Stormlands.
As the 2 armies approached, a gale which would give the battle its name, the Last Storm.
The king of Stormlands was Argilac, and he marched out to meet the army in a battle that would later be known as the Last Storm. Despite having double the number of knights and bannermen, Argilac lost the battle, and now Aegon had secured 2 of the 7 kingdoms. As news of Harrenhal and Storm's End spread throughout the other kingdoms, King Mern of the Reach and King Loren of the Westerlands decided to join forces and create the largest army Westeros had ever seen.
They had the mightiest army in history, a so-called Iron Fist.
They marched out onto the plains with 55,000 men to crush the Targaryen invaders. Aegon only had about 10,000 men. So if this were a normal battle, he would have been slaughtered. But this wasn't a normal battle. For the first and only time during the entire conquest, Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys unleashed all 3 of their dragons at the same time. The dry grass of the battlefield instantly caught alight, trapping the massive army in a terrifying inferno. Over 4,000 men were burned alive, including Mern and his entire family line. King Loren barely managed to survive, and the very next day, he threw down his sword and bent the knee. Aegon declared him to be Lord of Castle Rock and Warden of the West.
Why wouldn't he? A Lannister always pays his debts, and now we owed our lives to the crown. That was worth centuries of subservience at least.
This legendary slaughter became known forever as the Field of Fire. Up in the north, Torrhen Stark heard about what happened to the Lannisters and the Gardeners. He called his northern banners and marched a massive army of his own south to the Trident to meet Aegon. But when he finally arrived and saw the massive Targaryen host, along with all 3 dragons roaring in the sky, he realized something very important. If he fought, his men would all just burn like all the others. So in one of the smartest and most selfless moves in Westerosi history, Torrhen chose to lay down his ancient, 1,000-year-old crown. He peacefully bent the knee to Aegon, giving up his kingship so his people could live. From that day on, he was remembered with deep respect as the king who knelt.
The swords that Aegon took from them were not twisted, burnt, or mangled.
Even the conquest of the Vale was a swift victory for Aegon, as Visenya flew over the defenses of the fortresses and landed in the courtyard where the heir of the castle found her. As the regent of the Vale, Shara Arryn, ran outside and saw her son happily playing on Visenya's knee and urging her to take him on a flight on the dragon, without any choice left, Shara allowed her son to ride around the Vale with said dragon rider and handed her crown over to Visenya. Understandable.
Ronald had taken to the sky as a king, as a little boy would.
By this point, almost the entire continent belonged to Aegon, but there was one kingdom that simply refused to submit: Dorne. This desert kingdom in the far south was ruled by an old, blind woman named Merya Martell, the Princess of Dorne. When Rhaenys flew down to demand her surrender, Merya stood her ground.
The princess told the queen that the Targaryens weren't wanted in Dorne, and no Martell would ever bow, bend, or break, no matter how badly they burn.
And the Dornish proved it. Instead of fighting large, open battles where the dragons could easily destroy them, they used brutal guerrilla tactics and asymmetric warfare. They hid in the mountains, struck fast, and disappeared back into the harsh desert before the dragons could even arrive. The war in Dorne dragged on for years and turned incredibly bloody. The worst moment came at a castle called Hellholt. During an attack, a lucky shot from a massive scorpion bolt hit Rhaenys' dragon, Meraxes, straight in the eye. The dragon crashed to the ground, taking Rhaenys down with her.
House Martell remained unbroken, unlike the unfortunate Rhaenys.
The death of his favourite wife drove Aegon into an absolute blind rage. He and Visenya spent the next 2 years burning every single Dornish castle they could find, over and over in a period known as the Dragon's Wrath. But the Dornish still refused to give up. Eventually, the old princess passed away, and her children sued for peace. However, Dorne remained an independent kingdom for a while. With the conquest officially over, Aegon needed a seat of power that truly represented his new empire. He had gathered thousands of swords from every single lord who had fought against him, and used the black fire of Valyrian the Dread to weld all those blades together into a towering, jagged seat that became the iconic Iron Throne. A king should never sit easy. Aegon to his armorers. Aegon had united 6 of the 7 kingdoms through sheer force, fire, and blood, creating a massive dynasty out of nothing. The Maesters rewrote the timelines of history with BC as before Conquest, and AC as after the conquest of Aegon, truly showing the impact he left. The Maesters of the Citadel who keep the histories of Westeros have used Aegon's conquest as their touchstone for the past 300 years. The world of ice and fire, the reign of dragons, the conquest. But while Aegon the Conqueror had the strength, the mind, and the dragons to hold this massive new empire together, his sons were about to find out that keeping the Iron Throne was much, much harder than taking it. The early Dragon Kings. When Aegon the Conqueror died 37 years after his conquest, he left a massive, newly forged empire to his eldest son, Aenys Targaryen. But ruling a kingdom is very different from conquering one, and Aenys was absolutely nothing like his father.
Nobles learned to keep their eyes down, but the gods weren't used to sharing the heavens.
When Aenys rose to power, he was a weak ruler, and rebellions broke out throughout the 7 kingdoms. While Aenys was able to suppress these with the help of his brother Maegor, he was easily swayed by others, indecisive. You are a fool and a weakling, nephew. Do you think any man would ever have dared speak so to your father? Visenya Targaryen to Aenys. However, the biggest problem Aenys faced during his reign was the faith of the 7. The Targaryens used to practice incest to keep their bloodline pure. But the faith of the 7 considered this a massive sin. And when Maegor decided to take up another wife, just like his father, the faith revolted.
When Aegon died, the High Septon led the faith and its army in revolt, claiming that the Valyrian tradition of wedding brother to sister was an abomination in the eyes of the 7, though no one could explain where the divine mother and father had come from.
Thousands of warriors known as the Poor Fellows and the Warriors' Sons took up arms against the crown and occupied the massive sept of Remembrance in King's Landing. Aenys was so stressed and terrified by the rebellion that he fled the city and later died of a sudden illness, leaving the realm in utter chaos.
The king fled to Dragonstone, where he soon died of cramps.
Shortly after Aenys died, Maegor was crowned as the king on Dragonstone. The Iron Throne will go to the man who has the strength to seize it. After his coronation, Maegor flew to King's Landing on Balerion and planted his banner on Visenya's hill to rally men to his side. The head of the faith militant opposed him and demanded a trial of the 7 to settle this matter. This was the first time a trial of the 7 was held.
7 men against 7 men. Makes for a good show, I guess. But any man who's been in battle knows that the more men involved, the less skill needed.
Maegor had no Knights of the Kingsguard, but the common folk of King's Landing stood up and fought beside him during the trial. However, Maegor was the only one who survived the trial and later fell into a coma. He was treated by Tiana of the Tower, and after 30 days, he woke up from the coma and flew straight to the Sept to burn hundreds of the Faith militant. For the next several years, Maegor waged a ruthless, bloody war against the religious rebels and anyone else who questioned his rule. He put bounties on the heads of the holy warriors, paying a gold dragon for every scalp brought to him.
My ancestor Maegor the Wise, or Maegor the Cruel as men slander him, soon returned to the Septs.
He built the Red Keep, complete with massive walls, deep dungeons, and a completely secret network of hidden tunnels and passageways. When the castle was finally completed, Maegor threw a massive 3-day feast for all the builders, masons, and tunnel diggers to celebrate their hard work. But as soon as the feast was over, he had every single one of them slaughtered, so the secret of the Red Keep would die with them. Aegon the Conqueror had commanded it be built. His son Maegor the Cruel had seen it completed. Afterward, he had taken the heads of every stonemason, woodworker, and builder who had labored on it. A Game of Thrones. Chapter 18, Catelyn 4. Because of his endless bloodshed and tyranny, the entire realm eventually turned against him, and even his own family abandoned him. Realizing he had completely lost the kingdom, Maegor the Cruel was found dead the very next morning, sitting on the Iron Throne. His wrists had been slashed, and his neck was impaled on one of the jagged swords of the throne itself. To this day, no one knows if his own cards murdered him, or if the Iron Throne itself finally rejected him.
Aegon's own son, Maegor the Cruel, was killed by the very Iron Throne his father had forged, if you believe the tales.
With the tyrant dead, the crown passed to Aenys' last surviving son, a young man named Jaehaerys. No one expected much from a boy whose family had nearly destroyed the realm, but Jaehaerys would go on to become the greatest king the Seven Kingdoms had ever seen. Aegon the Dragon and his sisters conquered the Seven Kingdoms, 6 of them at least. But it was Jaehaerys the Conciliator who truly made them one. Writings of Umbert. Jaehaerys ruled for over 50 years, and brought a golden age of peace and prosperity to Westeros. Instead of fighting the Faith militant with fire and blood, he used diplomacy. He offered them a complete pardon for their rebellion as long as they put down their swords. And he promised that the Iron Throne would always defend the religion. To solve the issue of Targaryen incest, he sent speakers all over the continent to preach the doctrine of exceptionalism, basically convincing the people that Targaryens were closer to gods than men because they rode dragons. So regular laws just didn't apply to them. Those of Valyrian descent were not like other men. Targaryens had purple eyes and hair of gold and silver. They ruled the sky on dragons. The doctrines of the faith and the prohibitions against incest did not apply to them, and they did not get sick. Words of Gildain. Alongside his sister wife, Queen Alysanne, Jaehaerys completely transformed the continent. He built the massive King's Road to connect the north to the south, unified the chaotic laws of the land, and filled the royal treasury with gold. His reign was so incredibly stable that people simply called him the Old King. But outliving all your enemies also means outliving your own children. Jaehaerys was forced to call a massive council to choose who would wear the crown next. He officially passed the throne to his grandson, Viserys, leaving him a kingdom at the absolute peak of its wealth and power.
Jaehaerys called the Great Council to prevent a war being fought over his succession that could tear down the House of the Dragon.
The Dance of the Dragons. When King Viserys was crowned king, he inherited a realm at the absolute peak of its power. The Targaryen dynasty had never been richer, and the skies over King's Landing were filled with more dragons than ever before. But Viserys had one major problem. He had no male heir.
This is the last time, Viserys. I've lost one babe in the cradle, had 2 stillbirths and 2 pregnancies ended well before their term. If I have failed you in that, I am, but I've mourned all the dead children like you.
But Viserys was desperate to have a male heir, so desperate that he killed his wife in order to have one. However, the child died soon after being born, and Viserys was overcome with grief and guilt over his desperation to have a son. This led him to make his own child, Princess Rhaenyra, his rightful successor, and made all the lords of Westeros swear an oath of loyalty to her.
I, Viserys Targaryen, first of his name, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm, Princess of Dragonstone, and heir to the Iron Throne.
But while Viserys partially blamed Rhaenyra, his heir, due to the guilt he felt over killing his wife for his son, It was also because of Aegon's prophecy. Aegon the Conqueror foretold that a person from his lineage would stop the Long Night, and this prophecy was cemented in his Valyrian dagger. When Viserys was named heir, Jaehaerys told him of this prophecy, and as Rhaenyra was his only child, he passed it down to her to ensure it would continue.
And if the world of men is to survive, a Targaryen must be seated on the Iron Throne.
But years later, Viserys married Alicent Hightower, and she gave him a healthy son named Aegon. Before her marriage, Alicent and Rhaenyra were good friends, but they later began to hate one another, which eventually led to Alicent secretly planning to usurp Rhaenyra's throne.
If Rhaenyra comes into power, your very life could be forfeit. Aemon's as well. She could move to cut off any challenge to her succession.
By all the traditional laws of Westeros, a firstborn son would inherit the throne over an older daughter. However, still burdened by the guilt of his wife, Viserys refused to change his mind and kept Rhaenyra as the heir.
Go to bed, Amber. Shall I see after Queen Alicent, your grace?
Understanding the gravity of her situation, Rhaenyra chose to marry her uncle Daemon Targaryen after staging the death of her first husband, Laenor Valyrian. Before King Viserys passed away, he forced Rhaenyra and Alicent to settle their disputes with one another. But during his final moments, he spoke of Aegon the Conqueror's prophecy to Alicent. Alicent was unaware of the prophecy and assumed her husband had changed his mind and declared her son to be the next heir.
Prince Aegon.
To unite the realm against the cold and the dark.
After King Viserys died, Alicent Hightower and her father, Otto Hightower, usurped Rhaenyra's throne and appointed Aegon as king. Those who supported Queen Alicent and her son became known as the Greens, while those who stayed loyal to Princess Rhaenyra became known as the Blacks. Rhaenyra, who was living on Dragonstone, was not aware of her father's death, and when the news finally reached her, the shock and rage caused her to go into a traumatic early labor, resulting in a stillborn child. She blamed the Greens for the death of her baby and her father's stolen crown, and immediately declared herself the true queen of Westeros.
Well done, my prince. You're winning tourneys in no time. I don't give a shit about tourneys. Nephews?
As both sides started sending out messengers on dragons to secure alliances with the major houses of Westeros, Rhaenyra sent her young son, Prince Lucerys, to Storm's End to deliver a message. But when he arrived, he found that his uncle, Prince Aemond Targaryen, had already turned the Baratheons for King Aegon.
So you come with empty hands. Go home, pup. And tell your mother that the Lord of Storm's End is not some dog that she can whistle up at need to set against her foes.
Prince Aemond had always had a troublesome relationship with Rhaenyra's children, especially since he lost an eye because of them when he claimed Vhagar, the largest, oldest, and most terrifying dragon in the world. As Lucerys tried to fly away from Storm's End, Aemond chased him down so he could intimidate and scare him during a massive thunderstorm over Shipbreaker Bay. But even Targaryens do not have complete mastery over their dragons, and as the situation with Aemond and Lucerys intensified, both riders lost control of their dragons. Arax attacked Vhagar, causing Aemond to lose control of the beast, and it brutally ripped apart Lucerys and his dragon. This was the first major bloodshed in the conflict. This was no longer a political dispute. It was a brutal war of fire and blood that history would remember as the Dance of the Dragons. It was a war marked by stealth, murder, and betrayal as well. A war fought in shadows and stairwells, council chambers and castle yards, with knives and lies and poison. Writings of Gyldayn. After Lucerys' death, Rhaenyra was stricken with grief, and in her absence, Daemon Targaryen, her husband and uncle, planned to send 2 assassins to murder Aemon Targaryen in the Red Keep.
You're to find and slay the Prince Aemon Targaryen. He has silver hair and one eye. Should be easy enough to find.
The assassins were a rat catcher and a former king's guard, but they were nameless, and history knows them as Blood and Cheese. These assassins were unable to find Aemon Targaryen, but they couldn't go back empty-handed, so instead they entered Queen Helena's room and murdered Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen.
The Snow Sun.
After the assassination of Jaehaerys, the war quickly escalated into complete chaos, and proved just how devastating dragons could be when they fought each other. The Green armies moved throughout Westeros and demanded loyalty of the lords to Aegon. As they moved towards Rook's Rest, Rhaenyra sent Princess Rhaenys on her dragon, Meleys, to defend the castle.
You must send me, Your Grace. Meleys is your largest dragon and no stranger to battle.
Rhaenys and Meleys flew for Rook's Rest and arrived just as the Green Army was making progress in their assault on Staunton's castle. Meleys devastated the Green Army with her dragonfire, but Criston sprung his trap and alerted a hidden Aemond and Vhagar to join the battle. However, before he could enter the battlefield, he saw Aegon and Sunfire unexpectedly join in. Despite Aegon's efforts, Sunfire was brutally losing the matchup against Meleys. In a shocking plot twist, Aemond showed up and attacked both dragons, which resulted in Aegon and his dragon being burned alive.
You got it!
With Aegon defeated, Rhaenys directed Meleys to attack Vhagar, but ultimately, Meleys was outmatched by Vhagar, and she and Rhaenys were killed at the end. Desperate to protect her remaining family from the escalating slaughter, Rhaenyra tried to secretly send her two youngest sons, Aegon the Younger and Viserys, across the narrow sea to safety, but their ship sailed directly into a massive enemy fleet from the Triarchy, which had allied with the Greams. Aegon managed to escape on his small dragon Stormcloud and returned to Dragonstone.
Rhaenyra shipped her two youngest sons across the narrow sea for their protection, only for her youngest to return days later, clinging to the neck of his wounded and dying dragon.
When word of the ambush reached Dragonstone, Rhaenyra's eldest son and heir, Prince Jaehaerys, flew out on his dragon, Vermax, to save his little brothers. But what followed was the bloodiest naval battle in history, known as the Battle of the Gullet. During the battle, Jaehaerys flew Vermax close to the sea and crashed. As Jaehaerys tried to cling to a floating piece of wreckage, he was gunned down by a swarm of crossbow bolts.
The foolish boy let Vermax be hooked like a trout and dragged into the sea, where he soaked up even more arrows than seawater. His brother disappeared over the horizon or beneath the waves. No one could say for sure.
This was a significant turning point in the history of Westeros, because Jaehaerys was Rhaenyra's heir and the only other person who knew of Aegon's prophecy.
Aegon the Conqueror's dream. He called it the Song of Ice and Fire.
Jaehaerys' death made Rhaenyra paranoid, and she refused to tell anyone about the prophecy. After the Battle of Rook's Rest, Aemond became the Prince Regent and took control of his brother's army. He ordered Sir Criston Cole to march on to Harrenhal so he could defeat Daemon.
I'll fly out to meet you when the time is ripe. My uncle is a challenge I welcome, if he dares face me.
But when Aemond and Sir Criston reached Harrenhal, it was abandoned by Daemon's army. They secured the castle and celebrated their victory, but Daemon had a secret plan. As Aemond left King's Landing defenseless, Rhaenyra and Daemon saw the opportunity and seized it.
One day, King's Landing looked up and saw two dragons circling their foul city. Daemon and Rhaenyra had come for her throne.
Rhaenyra managed to capture King's Landing, but her victory was completely hollow, and she had grown paranoid. She believed one of the Targaryen bastards who had claimed a dragon was sleeping with her husband, and ordered her execution. However, Daemon spared her life, and wrote a letter to his nephew, challenging him to battle alone.
14 days later, a shadow blacker than any passing cloud swept over Harrenhal. Vhagar had come at last, and on her back rode one-eyed Prince Aemond.
While the two fought above God's eye, Caraxes locked his jaw around Vhagar's neck tightly, and they both began falling. Knowing they were both going to die, Daemon didn't hold back. He leaped directly from his saddle into the empty air and drove his Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister, straight through Aemond's eye.
Daemon ripped off his nephew's helm and drove the sword down into his one remaining eye so hard the point came out the back of the young prince's throat.
Both men and massive dragons crashed into the lake with an explosive impact, killing all 4 of them instantly. So violent was the crash that the waters of God's Eye boiled, and a great geyser of steam and mud and water rose up as high as the King's Spire Tower, fire and blood. But Rhaenyra didn't have time to grieve her husband, because when King Aegon fled, he had emptied the royal treasury, leaving Rhaenyra with no money to feed the people or fund the war. She was forced to raise taxes to extreme levels, which caused the starving people of King's Landing to turn against her. The situation escalated when the former Queen Helaena jumped off the balcony and killed herself,
demanding justice for Queen Helaena and her murdered son, among other foolish peasant fantasies.
As the city descended into chaos, a crazed barefoot prophet known as the Shepherd started preaching to the angry mobs, telling them that the dragons were demons and the cause of all their suffering. Tens of thousands of rioting small folk marched on the Dragon Pit, the massive domed structure where the Targaryens kept their dragons chained up.
There the demons dwell. This is their city. If you would make it yours, first you must destroy them.
Driven entirely by fear and madness, the mob broke down the doors and swarmed the trapped dragons. The dragons breathed fire and killed thousands of people, but they were chained to the floor and overwhelmed by the sheer crushing numbers of the crowd.
For every man who died, 10 more appeared, shouting that the dragons must die. One by one, they did.
Seeing the absolute chaos from the Red Keep, Rhaenyra's 3rd son, Joffrey, desperately wanted to save his own dragon inside the pit. He jumped onto his mother's dragon, Syrax, and tried to fly there. But dragons are not like horses. They only accept one rider. As they were flying, Syrax violently twisted and threw the young prince off her back. Joffrey plummeted into the city below, breaking his back and dying in the streets.
But the stupid beast didn't understand and twisted beneath him, fighting to be free of the little boy. Until it was.
By the time the morning sun rose, the massive dome of the dragon pit collapsed, and 5 Targaryen dragons lay dead in the ruins. Having lost her city and most of her dragons, a completely broken Rhaenyra fled back to Dragonstone with her son Aegon, hoping to rebuild her strength.
Rhaenyra abandoned the Iron Throne and sold her crown to buy passage for her and her last son back to Dragonstone.
But she walked straight into a trap. After King Aegon had escaped from King's Landing, he had gathered a few loyal men and travelled straight to his ancestral seat of Dragonstone and captured it. He killed the people who were loyal to her, and the rest turned against Rhaenyra. When she returned to Dragonstone, the men who had betrayed her captured her. In a final brutal act of vengeance, he had his dying dragon, Sunfire, burn and eat Rhaenyra alive. The worst part was that Aegon forced Rhaenyra's young son, Aegon the Younger, to stand there and watch his mother die. It would seem we are your prisoners, but do not think you will hold us long. My leal lords will find me, if they search the 7 hells, mayhaps. Aegon II reclaimed the Iron Throne, but the realm was completely shattered, and his own men saw that he was too broke to rule. Shortly after his victory, Aegon was found dead, assassinated with a cup of poisoned wine, and Aegon III was crowned king.
And replaced with the very boy who had watched his mother devoured.
The Dance of the Dragons was over, but no one had actually won. Almost the entire Targaryen family had wiped each other out. Aegon's prophecy was lost, and the skies, which had once been full of dragons, were almost empty.
2 scared children spouting oaths they didn't understand.
Aegon the Broken tried to hold together a kingdom that had lost its magic because the remaining dragons were slowly getting smaller, weaker, and closer to extinction. And a Targaryen without a dragon was just a regular person, surrounded by lords who were just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Rebellions and more civil wars. After the ashes of the Dance of the Dragons finally settled, the Targaryen family was a shadow of its former self. Aegon III grew up completely hating the creatures that had once made his family so powerful. And in the year 153 AC, the very last stunted dragon finally died, leaving the skies of Westeros empty for the first time in over a century. But the one they named Dragonbane, or Aegon the Unlucky, he was afraid of dragons, for he'd seen his uncle's beast devour his own mother. After Aegon III died, the crown passed to his son, Daeron Targaryen. He wanted to finish Aegon the Conqueror's work, so he set his sights on the one kingdom his ancestors never managed to conquer, Dorne. Daeron succeeded and conquered the Desert Kingdom, but the Dornish immediately rebelled, using brutal guerrilla tactics and poisoned arrows. They murdered the king under the banner of peace, and Daeron lost tens of thousands of men in the process. Daeron Targaryen was only 14 when he conquered Dorne. Benjen, a conquest that lasted a summer. Your boy king lost 10,000 men taking the place, and another 50 trying to hold it. Someone should have told him that war is not a game. The throne then passed to his brother, Baelor the Blessed. Baelor was completely obsessed with the faith of the Seven and deeply hated violence. Instead of sending another massive army to Dorne to get revenge for his brother, he walked there barefoot to beg for peace.
Many septons and scepters even claim that Baelor rescued his cousin, the Dragon Knight, from a snake pit, because no viper would strike a man so pure and holy.
Baelor's extreme religious beliefs completely controlled his reign. He even locked his own sisters in a tower called the Maiden Vault, so he wouldn't be tempted by them.
Baelor himself, believing him the Smith reborn. And when he died, Baelor replaced him with an 8-year-old boy, whom Baelor had seen speaking with doves that answered with the voices of the Seven.
As Baelor grew older, he would constantly starve himself and fast as a way to control his desires, but this inevitably led to his death. Baelor starved himself to death, fasting. Viserys might only have reigned a year, but he ruled for 15, while Daeron warred and Baelor prayed. And if he did remove his nephew, can you blame him? Someone had to save the realm from Baelor's follies. After a few brief power shifts, the crown eventually landed on the head of King Aegon IV, and he is widely remembered by history as the absolute worst king to ever sit on the Iron Throne. Aenys was weak, and Maegor was cruel. Aegon II was grasping, but no king before or after that would practice so much willful misrule. Aegon the Unworthy was corrupt, completely selfish, and spent his entire reign doing whatever he wanted while the small folk suffered. But the absolute worst thing he ever did happened on his literal deathbed.
One of my foolish ancestors didn't see what separated his bastards from our family proper and legitimized them all on his deathbed.
Aegon signed a royal decree that officially legitimized every single one of his bastard children. He gave them all the legal right to inherit his lands, his titles, and even the Iron Throne itself. To make things even worse, he had previously given the legendary Valyrian steel sword of Aegon the Conqueror to his favourite bastard son, Daemon. When Prince Daemon had Blackfire in hand, there was not a man equal to him. Not Ulrich Dane with Dawn, no, nor even the Dragon Knight with Dark Sister. When Aegon died, his trueborn son took the throne as Daeron II. Daeron was a good, smart king who finally brought Dawn into the Seven Kingdoms peacefully through a royal marriage. But half the country completely hated the Dornish, and they didn't respect a king who fought with words and treaties instead of swords. He was a good king, everybody says so. He brought Dawn into the realm and made the Dornishmen our friends. They looked at the legitimized bastard son, Daemon, who was an incredibly skilled warrior wielding the Conqueror's sword, and decided he was the strong leader Westeros actually needed. King Daeron was a good man. Why would you choose Daemon? Daeron was spindly and round of shoulder, with a little belly that wobbled when he walked. Daemon stood straight and proud, and his stomach was flat and hard as an oaken shield, and he could fight. Daemon took the name Blackfire and started a massive civil war known as the First Blackfire Rebellion. Once again, the realm was completely split in half, forcing brothers and friends to slaughter each other on the battlefield.
Adopting the name Blackfire, the bastards proved their nature and tried to seize their father's kingdom. And when they failed, their sons tried. When the sons failed, their grandsons tried.
The horrific generational war finally came to a climax during the Battle of the Nine-Pin Kings, where Barristan the Bold killed Maelys the Monstrous.
Till finally Sir Barristan the Bold, Knight of the Kingsguard, slew Maelys the Monstrous in the War of the Nine-Penny Kings, ending the last of the Blackfire line.
The Seven Kingdoms were left completely exhausted by decades of rebellion, and it was in this quiet, struggling world that a nameless orphan from the poorest streets of King's Landing picked up a sword and decided to become a knight. Tales of Dunk and Egg. Roughly 90 years before the events of Game of Thrones, and decades after the massive dragons died out, the Blackfires were pushed across the sea, and the Seven Kingdoms fell into peace. While the High Lords played their political games in massive castles, the ordinary people were just trying to survive. And it was in this quiet, struggling world that a tall, nameless orphan from the streets of King's Landing picked up a sword and decided to become a knight. To Dunk the Lunk, Pennytree used to call you. I recall. Lunks shouldn't try to think. Their heads are too bloody thick for such. His name was Sir Duncan the Tall. He was almost 7 feet tall, awkward, and completely broke. After Sir Arlan the Hedge Knight, who raised him, passed away, Dunk took his armour and rode to a massive tournament at Ashford Meadow, hoping to win some gold and make a name for himself.
Fits my grip as well as it ever fit his. And there is a tourney at Ashford Meadow.
On his way there, he met a strange, bald little boy who insisted on being his squire. The boy called himself Egg. Dunk thought Egg was just a poor, annoying orphan with a shaved head and had absolutely no idea the boy was actually Prince Aegon Targaryen, trying to run away from his life at the Red Keep.
And if you'll swear to do as you're told, I'll let you serve me for the tourney.
At the tournament, Dunk met a Dornish puppeteer named Tansel, who performed various kinds of plays. One night, she performed a play where a knight slayed a dragon, but in the audience stood a Targaryen prince who took umbrage in that. Aerion Targaryen was the cruel son of Maekar Targaryen, and believed he was a dragon in human form. So when he saw the puppet show, he considered it an act of absolute treason. He ordered his men to burn her tent to the ground, and snapped Tansel's fingers.
The only honourable thing a Targaryen can do for this realm is finish on his wife's tits. So I think he meant to kill the fucking horse.
Egg saw this whole ordeal unfold and quickly rushed to tell Dunk. Dunk stepped right in and punched the royal prince directly in the face to stop him.
Sir Duncan, you have to come! Arion's hurting her!
Hurting who?
Aerion commanded his royal guards to hold Dunk down and knock his teeth out. But right before they could mutilate him, Dunk's little bald squire stepped out of the crowd and ordered the guards to stop. This was the exact moment Egg finally revealed his true identity to the world. He was no peasant. He was Prince Aegon Targaryen, Arion's own younger brother.
No, they won't. If they do, they'll answer to my father. Let go of him. Wait, yokel, do as I say.
But striking a prince was punishable by death or the loss of a hand. But Dunk demanded a trial by combat to prove his innocence. However, Prince Aerion, being extremely spiteful, demanded a trial by 7, knowing completely full well that Duncan was not going to win. This was an ancient, brutal 7-on-7 melee battle that hadn't been seen in Westeros for well over a century.
A trial of 7.
Dunk had to desperately scramble to find 6 knights brave enough to fight against the royal family on his behalf. In a massive twist that shocked the entire tournament, the crown prince of the realm, Baelor Breakspear, actually stepped onto the battlefield to fight on Dunk's side. Baelor was the heir to the Iron Throne, but he knew Dunk was an honourable man, defending the innocent.
I will take Sir Duncan's side!
Dunk won the trial and kept his life, but it came at a massive, heartbreaking cost. Prince Baelor took a brutal blow to the head from his own brother during the chaotic fight, and when he took his helmet off, his skull had been split open. The heir of the 7 kingdoms died in the mud, all to save a completely nameless hedge knight.
Jurgis, get up, sir. Get up, sir. No. No. Please.
Feeling incredibly guilty, but bound by honour, Dunk took Egg as his official squire, and the two of them spent the next few decades wandering the 7 kingdoms. They slept in the dirt, fought off bandits, and saw exactly how the ordinary people suffered when the High Lords went to war. Once, they even accidentally stumbled straight into the Second Blackfire Rebellion at a castle called White Walls. Dunk ended up fighting in a chaotic joust and stopping a treasonous plot to overthrow the crown before it could even begin. The First Blackfire Rebellion had perished on the red grass fields in blood and glory. The Second Blackfire Rebellion ended with a whimper. But while Dunk and Egg were wandering the dirt roads, the Targaryen family tree was being violently chopped down by a bizarre and tragic string of deaths. First, a massive plague called the Great Spring Sickness swept through the capital and killed the ruler, King Daeron II, along with the 2 younger sons of Baelor Breakspear. The throne then passed to Daeron's second son, Aerys I, but Aerys only ruled for a few years and eventually died without any children. Aerys keeps his own apartments, and it is said he would sooner take a book to bed than any woman. With Aerys gone, the crown passed to Egg's strict father, King Maekar I. But Maekar's reign was cut short when his head was crushed by a falling rock during a battle against rebellious lords. And my father, he never thought the throne would pass to him, and yet it did. He used to say that it was his punishment for the blow that slew his brother. I pray he found the peace in death that he never knew in life. Suddenly, the Iron Throne was empty, and the only options left were Maekar's sons. But their fates were just as dark. His eldest son, Daeron, drank himself to an early grave. Then the cruel Prince Aerion Brightflame died screaming after drinking a literal cup of glowing green wildfire, completely convinced it would magically transform him into a dragon.
Aerion Brightflame, they called him. He thought drinking wildfire would turn him into a dragon.
The lords of Westeros were running out of options, so they turned to Egg's older brother, Aemon, and begged him to take the throne. But Aemon was a maester and had already forged his chain as a scholar and a healer, and he refused to break his vows. He officially surrendered his claim to the crown so it could pass to his little brother. To make sure the lords could never use him in a political rebellion against his family, Aemon voluntarily gave up his royal name and exiled himself to the freezing edge of the world to join the Night's Watch. Decades later, viewers of Game of Thrones would come to know him as Master Aemon.
My brother Aegon reigned after him when I had refused the throne, and I am a master of the Citadel, bound in service to Castle Black and the Night's Watch.
With all his older brothers dead or exiled, the little bald squire from the mud actually inherited the Iron Throne. Aegon the Unlikely, they called him, born the fourth son of a fourth son. He was crowned as King Aegon V, but the people called him Aegon the Unlikely because he was so far down the line of succession that no one ever thought he would rule. The very first thing he did was name his best friend, Sir Duncan the Tall, as the Lord Commander of his Kingsguard. Because of everything he saw on the dirt roads with Dunk, Aegon spent his entire reign fiercely fighting the High Lords to pass laws that protected the poor and vulnerable small folk. A bloody-handed tyrant, intent on depriving us of our God-given rights and liberties. But Aegon's reign ended in absolute horror. The High Lords kept pushing back against his reforms, and Aegon started believing that he needed dragons to finally force them to accept his laws. He gathered his closest family at a royal summer palace called Summerhall and tried to hatch ancient petrified dragon eggs using wildfire and blood magic. This talk of a stone dragon, madness, I tell you, sheer madness. Did we learn nothing from Aerion Brightflame, from the Nine Mages, from the alchemists? Did we learn nothing from Summerhall? No good has ever come from these dreams of dragons. I told Axel as much. The ritual went completely, terribly wrong, and a massive, uncontrollable inferno swallowed the palace. The fire burned King Aegon, his eldest son, and Sir Duncan the Tall alive. It is said that Dunk used his final moments to break down the doors and save as many people as he could before the ceiling collapsed upon him. Summerhall's Maester Corso sent a letter before his death, describing the tragedy, but a mishap led to ink blotting out much of the information. The blood of the dragon gathered in 7 eggs to honor the 7 gods, though the king's own septon had warned. Pyromancers, wildfire, flames grew out of control, towering, burned so hot that died but for the valor of the Lord Command. The tragic flames of Summerhall destroyed the hopes of the small folk and took the lives of 2 of the greatest men in Westeros. But from those very same ashes, a new Targaryen prince was born on the exact night of the fire. A prince whose future actions would eventually tear the entire dynasty apart forever. The road to ruin. After the tragedy of Summerhall and the death of his father, Aerys Targaryen took the Iron Throne. When Aerys first became king, he was incredibly charming and full of grand, ambitious plans. He wanted to build a new wall, further north, construct a brand new capital city out of white marble, and even build massive canals to bring water to the deserts of Dorne.
For 20 years, his reign was peaceful and prosperous. Aerys was well loved by his subjects and respected by his lords.
He also made a very smart decision by appointing his brilliant, ruthless young friend, Tywin Lannister, as his Hand of the King. For a while, the realm was incredibly peaceful and wealthy, but the pressure of the crown, combined with generations of Targaryen incest, slowly started to crack Aerys' mind.
As the saying goes, every time a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin. They must have dropped the one for King Aerys.
He grew horribly jealous of Tywin because the common people and the High Lords constantly whispered that Tywin was the one actually ruling the 7 kingdoms, while Aerys just sat in a chair. He eventually dismissed Tywin and made his only heir a member of the Kingsguard to spite him.
The Mad King had chosen me to spite my father and steal his heir. I wanted to rip off the White Cloak, but it was too late. A Kingsguard serves for life.
The king's sanity officially shattered during a rebellion at a town called Duskendale. Aerys marched into the town to demand their surrender, but he was immediately taken hostage. He was locked in a dark dungeon for 6 months, pushed, shoved, and completely stripped of his royal dignity. By the time Sir Barristan Selmy managed to sneak in and rescue him, the charming king was completely gone.
The king's guard couldn't defend him from the enemies he saw lurking in every shadow. My king went mad.
Aerys became entirely consumed by extreme paranoia. He stopped cutting his hair and fingernails because he was absolutely terrified of blades, and he refused to let anyone touch him. During this time, Aerys developed a sick and terrifying obsession with wildfire.
Aerys Targaryen, all the thousand maladies the gods visit on us, madness is the worst. He was a good man, such a charmer. But to watch him melt away before my eyes, consumed by dreams of fire and blood.
Whenever he suspected someone of treason, he didn't just behead them, he had them burned alive with the green substance. And it is said he would literally become physically aroused while watching them scream and melt in the throne room.
I saw firsthand that a king who couldn't rule his own mind couldn't rule 7 kingdoms.
While the king was losing his mind, his son, Prince Rhaegar, grew into a beloved, handsome, and incredibly skilled warrior. The entire realm looked at Rhaegar and prayed for the day he would replace his insane father.
No matter the wounds Aerys dug into the realm, we had faith that his son would sew it back together again.
But Rhaegar was obsessed with ancient prophecies, and his obsession would end up being even more destructive than his father's madness. Rhaegar believed in the legend of Azor Ahai, the legendary warrior who stopped the Long Night. It was also believed that just like his predecessors, Rhaegar had a prophetic dream of the Long Night. He believed that the only way to reincarnate Azor Ahai was through a child born of ice and fire. It all started at the massive tourney at Harrenhal, the largest gathering of lords Westeros had seen in years. Rhaegar won the final joust, and tradition stated that he had to crown a woman as the Queen of Love and Beauty.
We each set our feet in our saddles and lowered our lances and charged. And I fell.
Everyone expected him to crown his own wife, Princess Elia Martell. Instead, Rhaegar rode his horse right past his wife and dropped a crown of blue winter roses directly into the lap of Lyanna Stark.
Muddy and bruised, I then watched Rhaegar present Lyanna Stark with the victor's crown of roses, though she was betrothed to Robert Baratheon. And Rhaegar himself was married to Elia Martell. We all know what happened after.
A year after the tournament, Rhaegar and Lyanna completely disappeared, together. The Starks and Baratheons believed that the Targaryen prince had forcefully kidnapped her. Lyanna's hot-headed older brother, Brandon Stark, rode straight to the gates of the Red Keep and demanded that Rhaegar return his sister.
If he'd only known the depth of Aerys' madness, he wouldn't have dared provoke him.
Aerys immediately had Brandon arrested for treason and commanded his father, Lord Rickard Stark, to come to King's Landing to answer for his son's crimes. When Lord Rickard Stark arrived, he demanded a trial by combat. Aerys agreed, but in a horrific twist of cruel madness, the king declared that fire would be the champion of House Targaryen.
When Lyanna's father and eldest brother demanded justice, the Mad King obliged, laughing as he dispensed it.
He suspended Lord Rickard from the rafters in his full armor and lit a raging fire underneath him, slowly roasting him alive in his own steel shell. Simultaneously, he had strapped Brandon into a brutal strangulation device and placed a sword just barely out of his reach. As Brandon was forced to watch his father burn alive, he tried to grab the sword, but instead he choked himself to death.
Aerys burned him alive, and I could do nothing but watch. I had sworn a vow to a mad king and was honor-bound to obey him, even at the cost of my soul.
Straining to reach the blade to save him. After this slaughter, the Mad King sent a raven to the Eyrie, demanding that Lord Jon Arryn hand over the heads of his 2 young wards, Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon. Instead of obeying, Jon Arryn raised his banners. The North The Stormlands and the Vale all grouped together, teamed up, and the realm completely exploded into Robert's rebellion. As the war raged across the continent, Rhaegar and Lyanna had secretly gotten married. They had retreated to Dorne and were expecting a child. This child was Jon Snow, and he fulfilled the combination of ice and fire.
Robert's rebellion was built on a lie. Rhaegar didn't kidnap my aunt or rape her. He loved her.
When Rhaegar returned to King's Landing, he mustered his own army to meet Robert Baratheon on the Trident. The rebel army met the royal Targaryen army in the freezing waters, and while Robert was outnumbered, he still faced them head-on. In the absolute chaos of battle, Robert Baratheon and Prince Rhaegar finally fought each other.
As the battle raged around us, I faced off with Rhaegar, the stag and the dragon right there in the ford of the river.
Rhaegar was a brilliant swordsman, and he managed to wound Robert, but Robert was fighting with a blind, unstoppable, implacable fury.
On the banks of the Trident, my brother fought the man whose wife he'd stolen, and who fought to steal his birthright in return. In the end, Robert wanted it more.
He swung his massive, spiked warhammer with his terrifying strength and completely crushed Rhaegar's chestplate. With Rhaegar dead and the royal army totally crushed, the path to King's Landing was wide open. For the entire war, Tywin Lannister had sat safely in his castle, completely ignoring calls for help from both sides. But once he saw that the Targaryens had definitively lost, he quickly marched his massive army to the gates of King's Landing. The Mad King was thrilled, believing his old friend had finally come to save him, so he ordered the city gates to be opened. But that was a fatal mistake.
I warned Aerys not to open the gates. Prince Rhaegar was dead, our army scattered. The lion does not stir unless he smells meat.
The Lannister army immediately flooded the streets and began violently sacking the city, murdering, looting, and burning everything in sight. Trapped inside the Red Keep and listening to his city tear itself apart, the Mad King commanded his pyromancers to ignite massive caches of wildfire that he had secretly hidden under every street, house, and sept in King's Landing. But the 17-year-old knight sworn to protect him refused to let 500,000 innocent people burn.
Because when a dog goes mad, we put it down. Why not a king?
Jaime Lannister drew his sword, chased the Mad King to the foot of the Iron Throne, and drove his blade straight through Aerys' back. He slit the king's throat, saving the entire city, but earning himself the deeply reviled title of Kingslayer for the rest of his life.
A single thrust was all it took to end the greatest dynasty the world had ever seen.
The nearly 300-year-old Targaryen dynasty was completely shattered. The dragons were long dead, the Mad King was completely overthrown, and a brand new, hammer-wielding king was about to sit on the Iron Throne, totally unaware of the icy threat slowly waking up in the far, cold north. The Game of Thrones. For nearly 2 decades after the Mad King fell, King Robert Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne. But Robert was a warrior, not a ruler. He spent his time drinking and hunting, while his council played dangerous political games behind his back. The fragile peace of the realm was finally shattered completely when his hand, Jon Arryn, was mysteriously murdered by Peter Baelish. Robert travelled straight to Winterfell to ask his oldest friend, Ned Stark, to take the now empty position. Ned moved south to King's Landing and quickly uncovered a massive, treasonous secret. Robert's children were not actually his, but were secretly fathered by the Queen's twin brother, Jaime Lannister.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win, or you die. There is no middle ground.
Before Ned could tell the king the truth, Robert was killed by a wild boar in a hunting accident that Cersei had secretly arranged. Joffrey Baratheon took the throne and immediately proved his cruelty by having Ned Stark publicly beheaded.
My mother wishes me to let Lord Eddard join the Night's Watch, but they have the soft hearts of women. Sir Ilyn, bring me his head.
This single, arrogant act of violence ignited a massive, continent-wide conflict known as the War of the Five Kings. Robb Stark marched south to avenge his father, while Robert's brothers, Stannis and Renly, both claimed the Iron Throne for themselves. Stannis cemented his claim with the help of a red priestess, who was called Melisandre. Melisandre preached the religion of the Lord of Light, and declared Stannis as the prince who was promised, aka Azor Ahai.
Stannis Baratheon,
Your sword awaits you.
But while the lords and houses of Westeros bled each other dry fighting for a metal chair, a very different kind of fire was waking up across the narrow sea.
I will. But it's not your screams I want. Only your life.
The exiled Daenerys Targaryen lost her Dothraki husband, but she stepped directly into his roaring funeral pyre and miraculously emerged completely unburnt, carrying 3 baby dragons. Magic, it seemed, had officially returned to the world.
Stars don't fall from men. Red Comet means one thing, boy. Dragons.
Back in Westeros, the Lannisters were losing on the battlefield, so they resorted to pure treachery. During Robb Stark's march south, he needed to cross the Twins, but the Lord of the Twins was an old and unpleasant man. He agreed to let Robb Stark pass through if he married one of his daughters. While Robb initially agreed, he ended up going back on the agreement and married a nurse named Talisa.
I am hers, and she is mine, from this day until the end of my days.
This infuriated Lord Frey, and with the help of the Boltons, he created a secret alliance with the Lannisters to murder Robb Stark. Upon their return to the Twins, Robb, along with his mother and his entire army, was brutally murdered at the wedding feast of Edmure Tully and Lord Frey's daughter.
The Lannisters send their regards.
This became infamous as the Red Wedding. But the Lannister victory did not last long. Joffrey was eventually poisoned at his own wedding, and his uncle, Tyrion Lannister, was framed for the murder. After his younger brother Tommen was crowned as king, Tyrion was put on trial, but he knew he would not get a fair trial. So, with the help of Lord Varys and Jaime, he escaped, murdered his own father Tywin with a crossbow, and fled across the narrow sea to join Daenerys.
Shot me. You're no son of mine. I am your son. I have always been your son.
Meanwhile, up at the freezing edge of the world, Jon Snow had joined the Night's Watch and quickly realized that the true threat wasn't the wildlings, but the White Walkers. After Jon defeated Mance Rayder with the help of Stannis Baratheon, he became the next Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. As the new commander, he made the highly hated choice to let the wildlings through the wall to save them from the army of the dead. And as he saved the thousands from Hardhome, he truly saw the strength of the White Walkers. After Stannis helped Jon Snow to save the wildlings, he travelled south to Winterfell to recapture it from the Boltons. However, due to the harsh weather, he was unable to march far before he was overwhelmed. In an attempt to save his army, he was manipulated by Melisandre into burning his daughter alive, as she believed only a king's blood would save the camp.
Father! No!
As Stannis burned his daughter in the name of a prophecy, Melisandre abandoned him, no longer believing him to be the prince who was promised. Brutally defeated and backstabbed, Stannis marched into battle, which ended in his all-too-obvious death.
I, Brienne of Tarth, sentence you to die. Do you have any last words?
After Jon Snow brought back the wildlings south of the Wall, a few of the brothers of the Night's Watch disagreed with his choices and stabbed Jon Snow to death.
For the Watch.
Meanwhile, Brandon Stark had escaped north of the Wall in search of the Three-Eyed Raven, after Theon Greyjoy betrayed the Starks and captured Winterfell. After travelling through the north, he reached a giant weirwood tree where an old man sat entangled with its roots. The man was the Three-Eyed Raven, and slowly showed Bran the power of prophetic visions.
I've been many things. Now, I am what you see.
But one night Bran walked alone and saw the White Walkers standing together as an army. But just as he tried to come back, the Night King saw him and marked him. The Night King wanted to kill the Three-Eyed Raven because he was the memory of the world and could see everything.
He saw me! The Night King! He saw me!
He touched you.
The Night King tracked Bran down to the cave and tried to kill the Three-Eyed Raven. But before he could, Bryden transferred all of his knowledge to Bran and made him the new Three-Eyed Raven. Back at the Wall, after Jon had been betrayed, the Red Priestess, the one who had called Stannis the prince who was promised for all of these years and seasons, now decided it was Jon who was truly the heir to that Sword of Fire. She resurrected Jon. After his resurrection, he left the Night's Watch and took back Winterfell from the sadistic Ramsay Bolton in a massive, brutal clash known as the Battle of the Bastards. Down in King's Landing, Cersei Lannister was completely backed into a corner by her political and religious enemies. Instead of standing trial, She went for the Mad King's hidden cache of wildfire and blew up the Great Sept, wiping out all her rivals in a single, massive explosion. Her last surviving son, King Tommen, committed suicide in grief, allowing Cersei to finally crown herself Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Her reign was immediately threatened when Daenerys Targaryen finally sailed to Westeros with her massive army and full-grown dragons. Daenerys allied with Jon Snow, but they both realized the Iron Throne was a secondary problem.
I will allow you to mine the dragon glass and forge weapons from it. Any resources or men you need, I will provide for you.
And would not matter at all if the entire world was dead, killed and consumed by the White Walkers pouring down from the frozen north. When the Night King brought down a massive section of the wall, he began marching his undead army straight to Winterfell. The living armies fought a desperate, terrifying battle in the freezing dark. They barely survived, and the war only ended when Arya Stark dropped out of the shadows and drove a Valyrian steel dagger straight into the Night King's chest, shattering his entire army into ice and dust as a result. The same Valyrian steel dagger, I may add, that had the prophecy of a song of ice and fire. With the dead defeated, Daenerys marched her army south to finally tear Cersei off the Iron Throne. The battle was over almost instantly, and the city bells rang out to signal a total surrender. But the paranoia and grief of losing her closest friends had completely broken Daenerys. She didn't stop when the bells rang, but instead flew her massive dragon directly over the city walls and spent hours burning King's Landing to the ground, slaughtering hundreds of thousands of innocent people who had absolutely nowhere to run. The Breaker of Chains had become the same tyrant she had once sworn to destroy.
They don't get to choose.
Seeing the terrifying ash-covered world she planned to build, Jon Snow made the ultimate heartbreaking sacrifice. He embraced the woman he loved and drove a dagger directly into her heart to stop the cycle of violence.
You are my queen. Now and always.
In a massive display of grief, her dragon Drogon unleashed a torrent of fire. But it wasn't Jon he aimed at. Instead, Drogon turned his monstrous, deadly flames at the Iron Throne itself, melting the twisted swords down to a puddle of glowing slag, completely destroying the very seat of power that had caused 300 years of nearly perpetual suffering. The wheel was finally broken. The surviving lords of Westeros agreed to a brand new system where kings would be chosen by a council rather than being born to the position.
There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. And who has a better story than Bran the Broken?
They elected Bran Stark as the new king and allowed the North to become an independent kingdom. The continent was deeply scarred and completely exhausted, but for the first time in centuries, they had a real chance to start over. So that was the entire history of Game of Thrones. Comment down below if you think we missed something critical from this shortish overview, and don't forget to subscribe.